Hi everyone, it's LadyJenevia. I had this idea to start a series called Professional Critics Are Wrong, because they often are. The premise of this series was meant to be that I would review and analyze films that pretentious haters were not all that kind to. Now, I'm not saying that all critics are pretentious haters, but I am specifically referring to the section of them that treat film criticism as a personal ego-stroking session.
Look how smart I am that I can tear apart amazing works of art that I myself could never have created, and just so happen to not align with my
very subjective artistic preferences. I was going to start with Venom, but then Duncan Jones validated me with attention on Twitter when I praised Warcraft, so now we're going to talk about that film instead. Before getting into it, I will first offer up the context that I am not a gamer. I've never played a video game in my entire life. It does not mean that I don't respect the source material. After all, this review is about a film that I regard positively, and without the source material, said film would not exist. I'm only mentioning this for the sake of making it clear that I am not going to be nitpicking as to how accurate or not accurate the film was in depicting the lore and mythology that was established through, I guess there's also books that go along with the game. Again, I have no idea about any of that. But having said all of that, I will mention that Duncan has outright stated numerous times on the media tour for the film, because I was watching a lot of interviews about it, that the film is supposed to work for people who have absolutely no knowledge of the game. And guess what? It did for me.
So I tried to make a film where the fans would experience it one way and feel like they've gone home, and people who don't know anything about Warcraft enjoy it as a fantasy film where they're kind of, everything is new to them.
I should also warn you that there will definitely be spoilers in this review, so if that's a problem, then I suppose you should click away. But as well, you've had over 2 years to see this film, so I don't know what you're waiting for. So without further ado, let's talk about Warcraft. Introducing the world of Warcraft to an audience unfamiliar with the source material is not unlike a fantasy book or series being adapted for live action. There's not only the new characters, whose names are sometimes unlike anything the audience is accustomed to hearing in their day-to-day lives, but the additional locations, creature names, and any other world-building detail. One critique I encountered when skimming the discourse of so-called professional criticisms of the film Warcraft is that some found it difficult to absorb the new information. To that I say, you simply weren't paying enough attention. Going to a fantasy film and complaining about needing to pay attention to learn the new lore is like going to a horror film and complaining that it was scary. You are fundamentally misunderstanding the genre. If fantasy isn't a genre to your liking, that's perfectly fine, but it doesn't entitle you to bash a film for entirely adequate world building that you simply couldn't be bothered to pay attention to.
There has been a war between orcs and humans for as long as can be remembered. So many clans in one place, Orgrim. Laughing Skull, Blackrock.
It's a mark of the Kirin Tor. What are you doing in my city, Spellchucker?
But there was once a time when we did not even know who our enemy was.
Do not present subjective criticism and attempt to pass it off as objective criticism. Both have their place in film analysis, but they are not interchangeable feedback tools. One of the best parts of a great fantasy film with a large studio budget is the visual aspect of the world building. Warcraft effectively merges the best of both practical and visual effects. There were many elaborate, incredible set pieces constructed to enhance the authenticity, but any and all visual effects were also meticulously tended to. Just look at the hair movement on these creatures.
How much do you love your master? I'll do it!
Additionally, the film utilized motion capture technology to bring the orcs to life. Contrary to what some think, motion capture is an art form that relies heavily on the performers that don those grey pajamas.
I move Durotan, so every twitch and movement and thought and process and walk and stand and fight is done by me, same as you would, just with an awesome costume designed by incredible artists. So the motion capture ignites the life in that model.
Before delving further into discussions of the characters, it's important to also give credit to Ramin Djawadi, who did incredible work on the scoring. It really enhanced the impact of key moments since he really knew when to fill out the lower register, which is crucial to any epic film, particularly when action and battle have a strong presence in the story. One other misinformed critique I saw when skimming reviews from so-called professional critics was a claim that they couldn't get to know the characters well enough. If you actually watched the film and followed the story, you would have seen plenty of character content. All these criticisms do is beg the question of who is assigning these reporters to review these films when they've demonstrated an inability to pay attention to the content they're meant to cover.
Now, why would I do that?
Lothar is a brave and noble military commander who is also refreshingly compassionate in how deeply he cares for others. This is proven by his interactions with his sister, who is also the queen.
Tread carefully, you talk to your queen.
You are my sister first.
His son Callan.
I'm fine, it's fine. You had me worried.
And of course, Garona.
What are you looking at?
Fun fact, that look on Travis's face when he's looking at Paula Patton, he's not acting.
His Travis Fimmel.
I'm gonna get all this wrong.
Nice. Depends on the day. Other night.
There's something between us. It's called chemistry.
His Travis Fimmel. Married. I was wondering about that once too. I was like, really? Flirting like that with me at the bar?
Next question!
Paula Patton portrays the half-orc, half-human Garona, who has one of the best and most complex character journeys of the entire film. While Hollywood continues to progress at a snail pace in regards to offering diverse stories and characters of different backgrounds, genre material is one of the most consistent sources of stories that convey the experience of being multicultural or multi-ethnic. Just as Zack Snyder's Man of Steel showed an alien both struggling to fit into the world he grew up in and to understand the one his ancestors came from.
You're as much a child of Earth now as you are of Krypton. You can embody the best of both worlds.
We wanted you to learn what it meant to be human first. So that one day, when the time was right, you could be the bridge between two peoples.
Duncan Jones presents the struggles of navigating a multicultural identity through Garona.
Garona's character really needed to be that pivotal sort of fulcrum role between the two cultures that most of our movie takes place in.
Garona exemplifies the experience of being from two worlds but belonging to neither. The orcs keep her enslaved, only later embracing her when she proves her worth through the violent means their culture reveres. The humans are somewhat willing to offer her a place among them, though she's right to be wary of this, since their motivations to be nice to her are at the very least partially intertwined with their need for her to provide information that they can use to defeat the orcs. Garona's story is also wrapped up in one of the film's central themes, which is the senselessness of war. The orcs travel from their homeland to Azeroth, which is where the humans live. They need to find a new home to live in because their old world is dying. Their means of transport is fel magic. And what is the fel if not symbolic of war itself?
The fel is born of death. Must have a price. A price paid in lives taken.
The fel needs to consume victims to survive, and is symbolic of what war truly is, the most violent manifestation of a bloodthirst for power with no regard for the well-being of others. The film expands upon this in the hypocrisy of the villain Gul'dan, who demands that others sacrifice themselves to the fel, which represents the ongoing war with the humans, but never goes into these battles himself. Warcraft is a brilliant expose on contemporary politics, and more specifically, the world leaders who start senseless wars and brainwash people into believing there is honor in fighting, while never going onto the battlefield themselves. The contrast in leadership style between Gul'dan and the Human King shows the difference between how political leaders are versus how they should actually be. One issues hypocritical orders, lusts after power earned through violence, and puts himself above others, while the other is willing to go through the laborious work of diplomacy and lay down his life if it will save his people.
The dwarven forges must work overtime.
You treat us no better than dogs. We shall supply you no more.
Enough!
When the king is first introduced, he looks a bit silly, and that's not an insult to the costume design, it's actually a clever misdirect. When you see his hair and his outfits, it's easy to assume that he's going to stay up in his ivory tower while his soldiers fight for Azeroth. Instead, he rides out into the final battle and ultimately sacrifices himself on his own terms, and in the process empowers Garona to assume a leadership role among the orcs. This image of Garona devastated at having the king's blood on her hands is one of my favorite parts of the film, as it's symbolic of how the rise to power is often at the expense of others, even for those who start off with good intentions. Garona is not someone who would have wanted to harm anyone, but she's pushed into a no-win situation. I mentioned Man of Steel before, a film I adore, and it's worth noting that it parallels Warcraft in these crucial climactic moments. Cal doesn't want to kill Zod, but if he doesn't, Zod will kill these innocent people. Garona doesn't want to kill the king, but if she doesn't, a more violent orc will. By being the one to kill the king, she can gain the status and reverence she has so long been denied by the orcs for being mixed race. She can try to make a better world and save lives, something many young politicians may enter the political sphere aiming to do, but how many of those same people end up with blood on their hands along the way? In the end, both heroes have no choice but to take one life in the hopes of saving many more, but are devastated at having to inflict this violence.
I see you.
Garona also has a memorable and highly crucial scene with Medivh, the guardian of Azeroth. The fact that Medivh tells her about having traveled to other worlds, finding love, and being forced to leave it behind, really the subtext here is so heavy that I don't know why more people haven't talked about this. Well, never mind, I do know, because clearly I've established that the professional critics that reviewed this film didn't bother to pay attention while watching it. But it's very obvious that Medivh is Garona's father. Duncan, if you're watching this, you are more than welcome to slide into my Twitter DMs and tell me that I'm right, even though I already know that I'm right. Duncan has said in interviews that there were some things that got cut from the film very close to the actual release date.
To be honest, it won't take a sequel. It's in the extended edition, and it was in the cut until we got closer to the film coming out.
I'm going to speculate that this was the studio meddling because they wanted the film to be exactly 2 hours long, which seems like a very old school and outdated mentality to have, considering that we now live in a world where people are prone to binge watching an entire season of a new show the day that it gets dropped on Netflix or any other streaming platform that is making original content. I don't think it's right to patronize viewers and to presume that they don't have the attention span to sit through an entire film. If the content is good, I see no reason why you cannot make it longer than 2 hours. Medivh's secretive nature and the way he lashes out at Khadgar when Khadgar takes the initiative to do his own research into the strange magical ongoings can also be interpreted as the way figures in power attempt to conceal information from the public to prevent the loss of their own stature. But I'm already getting long-winded enough talking about the anti-war aspects of Warcraft, so let's just get back to that.
What's special about the film, I feel, in comparison to others of this stature or whatever, is there's so many people to root for. On every side there's good and bad, and there's not the typical good guys beating the bad guys up.
For critics to complain about the moral ambiguity of the two opposing sides, it merely exposes that they have fundamentally misunderstood the reality of war. Fear of the other is a weaponized tool that plays on people's ignorance of that which is foreign to them.
I did not see how we could side with the humans against our own kind. I was wrong.
Gul'dan is a tyrannical, power-hungry leader, and the Fel is a destructive force that consumes lives indiscriminately. Whether it's land, animals, or the young and innocent, war destroys everything.
The Fel takes life from more than its victims. Kills the earth and corrupts those who use it.
Gul'dan and the Fel are both entities that exist on the sides of the orcs. However, Durotan is also an orc and the leader of his clan. His story is crucial for the emotional depth it brings to the orcs as a people. He has a wife, a new baby, and they are his main driving force. They are the reason he wants to seek out a new world and make a better life. By and large, Durotan is good. He's not bigoted against Garona, and he's also not naive to the difficulties she faces as a mixed-race orc among their kind.
If I return, would you take me into your clan?
You're safer here.
He and the king are both willing to lay down their lives for the betterment of their people. They see the bigger picture of what's at stake in this conflict.
Then why is he here?
To save my people.
This is another one of my favorite shots of the film, as the transition from one language to another presents a shift in perspective that reminds the audience that there is no oversimplified good and evil in the two sides of a war. A lack of understanding between cultures, which can often be exasperated by a language barrier, is not a legitimate justification for violence and conflict. What's so brilliant about the presence the orcs have in their arrival to Azeroth is that they can offer a commentary on both violent colonizers looking to invade and steal land, lives, and resources from people that already lived there.
Wherever Gul'dan works his magic, the land dies.
And refugee crises, where people are simply looking for a new life and home when their previous one has been destroyed.
This is not Orc World. Orc World is dead.
One of the most brilliant and tragic points of Warcraft's story is that there should be no reason for these two sides to fight. As far as we know of, there is enough room and resources for the orcs to live in Azeroth without any need for violence. But one power-hungry warlord and a culture that glorifies violence is enough to ensure that this conflict could go on for generations to come. If fantasy isn't your preferred genre, then there's no need for you to force yourself to watch Warcraft. Every viewer should be free to indulge in the filmmaking styles that appeal most to them. But to all the critics that tried to claim that the story or characters were lacking in depth, my response is that your manner of analysis is nothing I want to give my clicks to, not now nor ever. Now that I've reviewed the film and offered up my analysis of its content, I will explain how it is that I came to watch Warcraft finally, because I only did see it quite recently for the first time. It was on Netflix, and the reason that I finally got around to watching it, I recently had my love of Rock'n'Rolla re-triggered. It's one of my favorite films, but I hadn't watched it in a while, and Venom came out, and Tom Hardy is in Venom, and Tom Hardy was in Rock'n'Rolla, which is a great film if I've not made that quite clear enough. And do you know who was also in that film? Toby Kebbell, who is a criminally underrated actor, and it offends me how many times he's been made to die in roles. At this rate, he's going to be the next Sean Bean, combined with Andy Serkis, you know, because of all the motion capture. But I digress. I fell down this rabbit hole of watching a bunch of his interviews because I wanted to get a sense of how he approaches his roles and prepares and what have you. It's all quite interesting. I do that for anybody whose work I like, whether it's actors or directors or writers or whomever. So one thing led to another, and eventually I ended up on a bunch of Warcraft interviews from that junket. But upon hearing the cast and crew talk about it, it sounded super interesting, and I love epic fantasy stories, so I decided to give it a watch, and lo and behold, I loved it. And then it started to stir up memories of Comic-Con a few years ago. I go to Comic-Con every year, and I remember now, not that I had forgotten, but I hadn't really thought about it until all of this started happening, that a friend of mine decided to go to the Warcraft signing that year because she's in love with Rob Kazinsky, that's one of her men. And I don't know what, but I didn't do that. I was doing something, and clearly it was not important, because now what I remember from that situation is that after the signing had happened and she came back, she told me that Toby Kebbell had been there. And I was so livid that I could have met him and did not. I was not mad at her. She didn't know, and I didn't know that he would be there, but he was there. Does the universe hate me?
100%.
Thank you as always to my patrons. Your support is greatly appreciated. If you would like to become one of my patrons, that will be linked in the description box. Or you can simply just leave a like, comment, subscribe as a way of showing your support for me in this very difficult time. A little piece of me has been dying every day because Guy Ritchie has not announced anything about moving forward with a Rock'n'Rolla sequel. Just the occasional question will pop up in some of the junkets that he does. I've been watching a lot of Guy Ritchie interviews as well lately, because, you know, triggered. Johnny Quid is doing well now, and I need to see him flourish and living his best criminal life. Don't forget to follow me on Twitter and Instagram, as those are the social medias that I am most active on. Unless you're Toby Kebbell, and you don't have social media accounts. So there's zero way to send out a message saying, hey, you were awesome as Johnny Quid. But that's it for now, so until next time, this is LadyJenevia, signing off.